Tested recently hosted a screening of The Martian, the new film based on the acclaimed book by author Andy Weir. After the screening, Andy and astronaut Chris Hadfield joined Adam Savage on stage to chat about the movie, space technology, and NASA's plans for a mission to Mars.
Check. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I've been excited about movie night here with these guys for months now. It's very, very entertaining to sit next to Chris watching The Martian. When Mark cuts his suit, Chris gets this look on his face of like fingers on a chalkboard. But the best is that when Mark is stapling himself up, Chris turns to me and says, "Have you ever done that?" I said no, and he said, "I have."
Not myself, though.
Oh, okay.
I stapled somebody else up, yeah.
You stapled somebody on the space station?
No, just as part of training. Yeah. As part of training, you get qualified as an emergency medical technician, and then you go work in the hospital, and you work in the cadaver lab initially, so you get all basic skills on cadavers, and then you work in all the different wards, burn ward, eyeball ward, whatever. Then you work in emergency, just helping out a real surgeon, and then in the operating room, and then you go work in emergency, and just as everybody comes in, you sew them up and staple them up and intubate them and whatever they need. So in fact, the poor, unsuspecting populace of Houston has been sewed up and stapled up by me a little bit. And that's just in case something like that happens on a spaceship. So yeah, that's kind of the stuff we train for.
That sounds like such a cool rotation.
Yeah, it's kind of odd, really. Yeah, you think, but luckily none of that happened when I was on the spaceship. But yeah, just in case.
I'd be really nervous if I went into an emergency room in Houston and there's some guy in an astronaut outfit, in the jumpsuit, the blue jumper, and he's
wearing
just like,
gloves.
I'm going to help you today. I'm a pilot, but I'm sure I can do it.
I'm sure we can fly this thing. Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about the level of concision? There's about a third of your book left in the movie, in terms of the number of things that go wrong for Mark. But it's like a master class in how to take all of these different things and boil them into something that can last 2 hours.
Yeah, I think they did a fantastic job because, if you had everything that happened in the book happen in the film, it'd be a 6-hour movie, and so you can't do that. But I think the things they removed were kind of like self-contained subplots that, everything was kind of back to normal when they were done, so it doesn't affect the long-term plot that much. He had a much in the book. He has a much bigger problem getting from Ares 3 to Ares 4. I mean, that's a big deal, and he has a lot of challenges along the way. And there's a bunch of other stuff. I can't quite remember everything.
You said that you had a question for Chris.
Oh yeah, I did, and I was kind of interested. As a military man and a space station commander, I was wondering if you found yourself in Lewis's position, where you have to decide whether or not to disobey NASA's directives, but you had a pretty good chance of saving a crewmate. What would you do?
Yeah, the way it was portrayed in the movie, I thought was just right. Actually, my disappointment with some other space movies has been the really unrealistic characterization of what astronauts are like and how the decision-making process goes and the level of huge effort in gaining competence before you go so that you have a mutual trust and expectation. And it's done. Your book does it exquisitely well. Your book nails what it's like to be. Watney would, if he was in the office, would just be just like a guy in the office. He's just perfect. And but all the little phrases they use, the sort of the mantras you have. What's the next thing that's going to kill me, and how are we going to beat that thing? Because we have to beat that thing because nothing else matters until we beat that one. So the whole idea of hey, we're safely on our way home right now, but there's a way to go back and get them. I don't think there'd be any question. And on my second flight, when I was on board the space station, I was talking to one of the crew members up there, Sue Helms, and in passing, she said to me at one point, I thought it was really funny. She was just talking to me, and she said, "Hey, Earth said that we need to do this." And I was going, "Earth said." And it was the first time I'd really seen the fundamental schism of personality between the crew and the 7 billion people on Earth. But in order to maintain your mental health on board, you have to have that schism. You have to recognize that you are a separate entity from Earth, and nobody else is actually risking their life or has actual final authority for what's happening. You of course have huge respect for the expertise on the ground, and you do everything they say as much as you can. But when it comes right down to it, and when we go to Mars, that schism is gonna be way, way bigger. And within a few weeks, they will be Martians, not Earthlings, and they will be a separate entity from everybody else. And so that sense, in order to maintain the esprit de corps, in order to have a healthy, psychologically healthy crew, you're going to have that. Where, hey, Earth gave us a suggestion, but it's us. This is our ship. You have to have that sense of ownership. So I thought that was very realistic.
Cool. So Andy, I emailed you after the film had a great opening weekend, and you said, I think I'm on my 11th of my 15 minutes of fame. But it's kind of amazing where you start out as a NASA fan who write this book, and now you've actually significantly helped NASA. They've been able to, they've participated significantly in this film, and they've pushed it. NASA's really great right now, and a lot of it is because of The Martian. Have they thanked you or sent you a bottle of champagne?
Well, I mean, indirectly. I mean, I got to go to NASA and do a bunch of VIP tours, and my favorite moment of it was like they let me go into the MCC, the Mission Control Center, for ISS, and sit at the Cronus station and remote control a camera mounted to the outside of ISS. And I pointed it up at the solar cells, pointed it over at the thermal regulators, and then pointed it back at the old home world, and they put the feed up on the big screen. 'Cause this is an interesting thing. Like I'm this level of nerd. Like when I was a little kid, I didn't want to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a flight controller. Like, I'm serious. I just always thought the coolest positions on the Enterprise were the guys in the background on the bridge who had a big control panel in front.
And you got to control the spaceship from mission control.
Well, I got to control a camera.
No, but that's part of the spaceship. That's cool.
They didn't put me at ADCO.
So within all the visits you've made to NASA, when you start writing The Martian and you're thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I got to see or touch or deal, have you fulfilled that?
Pretty much. I mean, I've gotten to do like every professional fantasy I've ever had has been like, I was sitting around writing a book. Next thing I know, I get to hang out with I'm in the middle of this really weird Venn diagram where I get to hang out with famous scientists, famous authors, movie stars, and astronauts. I like it.
I think we should take some questions from the audience. Does anyone out there have questions for these two guys? Any? Yes.
I just wanted to ask, how did you feel when they played Starman?
How did you feel when they played Starman?
Actually, I thought it was a really lovely touch. I thought it was really cool because. No, but I mean, obviously Bowie had a huge fascination with the whole thing. He wrote Odyssey before Apollo 11. He wrote Oddity before Apollo 11, and around the time he stole the name from Odyssey, and then everything he did multiple reincarnations of himself in those various roles. So I thought it was a lovely touch in there. It's sort of an unexpected but really nice. I liked it. It was cool. And it wasn't really disco, which was good.
Were you getting tired of the disco?
No, it was actually, I was telling Adam when we sat down, I think I liked the music better this time. Or not the music, the movie. I liked the whole movie better this time. I don't know why. I really liked it the first time, but I just fundamentally enjoyed it even more this time. I think I saw the personalities a little bit more, and it was great.
You told me that Andy had captured, and you said this here, just perfectly the temperament of an astronaut. Is that something that's innate, or is that something that happens during training, or is it a mix of both?
Yeah, it's mix of both for sure. I don't know if you know Don Pettit. If you've met Don Pettit, very experienced astronaut. He's a super brilliant guy. Worked at Los Alamos. PhD right at the very hairy edge of what human minds can do. And he came into the astronaut office as a brilliant fellow, but not particularly operationally experienced. You know, he hadn't operated aerospace machinery. He just didn't have the type of experience you might necessarily want. But somewhere along the way, through all of the basic training and then through the survival training we do and leadership training and living at the bottom of the ocean and everything, at one point he went down to Antarctica as part of it to go pick up meteorites down there. And when he came back, he briefed the whole office on the necessity to have expeditionary behaviors, to have that mentality of how the mission is ahead of you, and something may just seem like something fun to do, but if it's risking the overall probability of mission success, then you would never ever do it. And to him, that was, in my mind, having known him since the day he was hired, it was something that was put into him after he got into the office. So he's obviously a brilliant guy. He's physically very strong and fit, but then do a really careful job of trying to give the right attitudes and mentalities so you have the whole package. And Don's a great guy, flown in space multiple times since. So I think it's both. Now, you want to be careful who you choose, but at the same time, we work so hard trying to get as many skill sets in as possible, so just in case bad stuff happens.
Are you? I know you're working on another book. You said more science fiction book.
Yeah. So I'm like right now I'm working on my next book, tentatively titled Zhek, Zhek. It's a more traditional sci-fi book. It's got aliens and faster than light travel and stuff, but done my own way. I came up with my own little kernel of bullshit physics that enables faster than light travel, and it's
Everybody has to.
Everybody has to, and it is not in conflict with any real physics. It's just like I said, like, here's some physics you didn't know. And you can't use it to violate conservation of momentum, conservation of energy, causality. I made a few. I made sure you can't like make a perpetual motion machine or destroy energy with it, basically. And everything's based either on that or real physics. But yeah, I have a question for you. So I know you're, well, it's not, this is not an investigative report, it's okay. Here are some pictures from which, no, I was just wondering, because I know you're a big spacesuit guy, movie props.
Oh, yeah.
Spacesuit, so are you going to be making a...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really, the spacesuit is beautiful. The spacesuit was designed by Janty Yates. She has done most of Ridley Scott's films, everything from Gladiator, Prometheus. And
There weren't a lot of spacesuits in Gladiator.
No. But she's an amazing. She is really just a brilliant costumer. In the same way that a screenwriter can write everything from a ye olde history to a modern space drama, she is the same. And I'm a big fan of her work, and I really think that the Prometheus suits, which are definitely apparent, some of the design of the Prometheus helmets is apparent in the Ares helmets. I think that they're actually referring to an old, ancient science fiction movie called Things to Come. Ray Milland wears this giant helmet that I think she's referring to. I hope to ask her about it someday. But yes, I am slowly gathering the parts. Frank Ippolito just hooked me up with an order of buckles, of all the different buckles, nice. And I've already got some of the suit parts gathered and in a box labeled Martian spacesuit.
Very nice.
I have about 600 photos saved already. They put on one of the spacesuits at the They put up one of the spacesuits at the ArcLight Cinema in Los Angeles, which is. Oh yeah, I got Frank put up a Flickr gallery, and then a bunch of other people from the Replica Prop Forum did so.
So was it an actual prop?
It was. Film? There are some helmets in movie theaters around the country that are bullshit helmets.
Yeah, I know. I saw that.
Don't be fooled by them.
Yeah, they're like a Halloween mask version of.
Yeah, they're terrible.
What did you think of the suit, just as a suit, though?
It's again. I think it's positing some of those future technologies that haven't happened yet. Like, in order for such a close-fitting suit to maintain some kind of pressure, it's going to have some sort of smart nanofiber that can constrict and hold that pressure in. That's perhaps the most science fiction-y part of this whole film, is both how easy those suits are to take off and put on, and how close-fitting they are.
And the suit was running at the same pressure as the HAB, which was 14 or 10 point whatever PSI, right?
Well, that's
12. I think the HAB was at 12 all the time.
Is that what it
little
said?
Thing said.
Okay.
12, which is about the same as a football, right? Maybe
well,
not
in Boston, maybe.
Yeah, maybe not in Boston.
So,
yeah.
Like,
Which actually was one of my pet peeves of the movie when he tapes the tarp over the hole.
Yeah.
That would be under really great pressure.
So that's true, but when I watched the movie, that was like when Fox brought me in to watch the movie. So the first time I saw it, and the movie didn't even have most of its special effects. So it was a grainy JPEGs of Mars in the background and stuff. But one thing that bugged me was all the wind and like the fact that it like inverted that little seal that he did to the hab, and all that stuff was bugging me. And I was like, I can't bitch about this because I'm the one who made the story such that a windstorm on Mars can knock over a 12-ton spaceship, right? So I'm the one who initially introduced this inaccuracy, and they just ran with it. So I can't bitch. You can.
I can. That bugged me.
Yeah, well, it bugged me too. I wish they didn't highlight my error. Well, it wasn't an error. I did it on purpose.
So Iron Man flight by cutting your glove, is it possible?
Well, before we go to that, I just want to say, like, one kind of like technology that must have been invented between now and 2035 when this takes place is rapid EVAs. Like, basically the ability to say, I'm going to put on this, like, from the moment I decide to do an EVA, within 10 minutes I can be out on my EVA. And right now it takes, what is it, like 6 hours or something?
Yeah, about 4 hours.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that they slip up into the suit like this and their arms are in the arms. So how did you get your arm like, how did that happen? Because you almost have to dislocate your shoulders to get your arms into the hard upper torso of a spacewalking suit. And so it was just kind of like, oh, okay, we'll just blow past that. That's all right.
I was going to ask about that glove, but I realized you've actually experienced an emergency in space. You were blinded for a period of time on one of your walks.
Yeah, my first spacewalk. Yeah, I was blinded for about a half hour.
Will you tell a little bit of that story?
First, I just wanted to talk about the blowing a hole in the glove. I thought that was we have had people come pretty close to putting holes in the suit. We've got a Vectran layer and multiple layers, but the glove's pretty fragile because you got to keep it thin enough to be able to use your hand. So we're always checking the glove for holes like that. You've got your regular oxygen supply in the suit, and then you've got a secondary oxygen pack, which is 6,000 psi tucked underneath you. So you have we regularly watch our oxygen consumption, and one of the problems is you can't tell if you have a leak or if the astronaut's just metabolizing the oxygen quickly. Like if you're working really hard out there, or if you have a very small leak, how do you know which one it is? Which one is using up the oxygen supply? It's not that trivial. And we never dip into the secondary oxygen pack, except in emergency cases. But if you did pop a little hole, then of course you'd get some sort of vectored thrust, although it would probably just be frayed kind of hole. But the space station's constantly getting hit by little meteorites, and every time it hits one of the handrails, it leaves a jagged little thing sticking out of the handrail as the little ones hit. So we're very concerned going outside every single time that you don't just snag your hand on one of those, because that will rip a hole, and then you're Mark Watneying all over the place. So it is a concern, but if anybody starts seeing the pressure drop, and we have alarms in our chest, and of course they're watching it from the ground, then you move rapidly back to and get plugged into the ship's oxygen quickly. And we're pretty confident for any reasonable size hole. You probably wouldn't have quite as much, extra energy as shown there, but that's all right. During my first spacewalk, there was contamination in the suit, and it got in one of my eyes, and just all of a sudden, and so my left eye just suddenly slammed shut in pain. And I couldn't open it. The funny part was, it reminded me of the way you characterized Mark Watney, but the funny part was, as soon as my left eye hurt, I went to rub my eye, and my hand went doink off the visor, and I was like, boy, I'm glad nobody saw me do that. That was embarrassing. But I couldn't rub my eye, and I couldn't get the stuff out of it. And the trouble is, tears don't fall without gravity, so the big blob of contaminated tear I tried to rub it inside. I couldn't. It got bigger and bigger until it crossed the bridge of my nose and contaminated both eyes. And then it was only the slow process of crying and evaporating tears that eventually diluted the contamination enough that I could see again. So I was blind for about a half hour.
Over the length of the walk was?
The length of the walk ended up being 8 hours, which is really long for a spacewalk. Long time, no food. It's sort of like being on a exercise gym, for 8 hours, because the suit is the same pressure as indoor volleyball. If you push on an indoor volleyball, that resistance you get, that's what those white spacewalking suits are pressurized to. And so if you can consider every time you move your wrist or your hand or anything that you're pushing against that level of fabric resistance, the suit is really physically tiring. So 8 hours is
exhausted at the end.
Yeah, it was funny. You're motivated, so you. But I remember coming back inside on my first spacewalk and getting out of my suit, and then just sort of, it was in the space shuttle, and floating up to a corner of the space shuttle and just shivering for about 20 minutes, just as my body, it was completely out of gas, until eventually got warm enough and revved up enough to get back to work and put the suit away.
Did you ever find out what the contaminant was?
Oh yeah, it was really it was just the surfactant that we put on the inside of the visor to keep it from fogging up, because every time you exhale, it wants to fog up the visor. We actually, it was something Adam and I, when we did the walk around at Comic-Con, he had put a nice liquid cooling ventilation garment inside. But one thing we learned a long time ago was we should blow the air this way so the air comes up and over your head and down the visor, so that the air is constant. The fresh air that's coming into your suit is actually pushing across the front of your visor so it won't fog up. And both of us, although we were cool enough, our visors fogged up pretty badly.
Yeah, I'll add the over-the-head cooling for all the future spacesuits I make.
Yeah, so it was just a little. We used to put this sort of mixture of oil and soap in order to keep it from fogging up, and it just picked up some loose water. So it was just like putting oil and soap into my eye. And it doesn't sound like much, it's just the littlest thing. But if just try putting oil and soap in your eye, it won't work. And then
in space,
if it's in both eyes, then what seems like a really minor problem suddenly becomes huge.
Is that the moment? I mean, where you? Most people would be panicking at that point. What keeps you from panicking?
Well, I'd rather talk about Luca Parmitano a year and a half ago. He was out on a spacewalk, first spacewalk, brilliant Italian astronaut, super talented guy. But he was working, and the back of his neck started feeling wet. And you can't do anything about it. He's going, and how do you even know what wet feels like, in weightlessness? Just like, back of my neck feels funny. It sort of feels like wet, because you're wearing a Snoopy cap under there. But then he started realizing, yeah, it is wet. And he reported it, and he's out there with Chris Cassidy, and Chris Cassidy says, well, it's probably you got this little water bag with a Camel bite valve drink. And he said, well, drink all your water quick, because that may be leaking. So he drank all his water, but then it was still, water was coming from somewhere, and it was getting worse. And he's like talking about it, but he's trying not to make a big deal of it. But then as soon it sticks to you like jelly or something because of the surface tension, it got, the first thing it covered with both ears. So suddenly couldn't really hear anybody anymore. So he couldn't hear what they were telling him to do. And then it was just crawling across his head and started getting into both his eyes, this like living ball of water coming across his head. And so he decided he had to go back, but by the time he was going back to the airlock, it was in both his eyes, so he could only sort of see murkily. And so he was following his tether back sort of blindly, and then it was like coming down, every time he inhaled through his nose, it was coming in his nostrils. And so he's in there, but fortunately, by the time they sort of did a high-speed ingress and got them repressed, and it wasn't actually covering his mouth by the time he got in. And that's one of those things you cannot predict, because the combination of failures that causes that water to back up can't happen in gravity. It can only happen in weightlessness. Gravity will always mask that from happening. And so the NASA solution to it was, because you still might have to do an emergency spacewalk, they're going, well, we can't fix the problem right away, but we can sure come up with a solution. And for launch and spacewalks, we wear the maximum absorbent garments, MAGs, and so he took a diaper and put it on his head for the next spacewalk, so that if the water started leaking in, the diaper would soak up all the water, so that
then start pushing his face into the
well,
visor.
it would give you more time to recover. It's just kind of funny. Do a spacewalk with a diaper on your head, but until NASA can figure out for sure how to not have an older suit start leaking up there.
And the source of the water was the humidity.
Well, you
collection?
saw in the movie the guys are wearing those blue vests with the NASA whenever they're doing a spacewalk, and it's got all the, I don't know if you noticed, it has the little tubes in it.
Those were the same brand that we wore at Comic-Con.
I saw them, yeah. But we wear a version of those, and they're just a whole bunch of little plastic tubing all over your whole body. Because the temperature extremes are so high, it's plus 150 C in the sun and minus 140 C in the shade. So you can't even let your
You're comfortable
skin,
on average.
Yeah, you can't even let your leg touch the legs of the pressurized suit because it's like it can be so hot or so cold, and so you wear the liquid around your body, and it's pumped through a recirculating system, and then we have a flash evaporator on the back. Anyway, and you get this dial right here in order to regulate how much of the water is recirculating. Anyway, so there's a reasonable amount of water in the suit that is used. The evaporator to cool it, and then running around your body to maintain a bubble around your body of decent temperature. And that was the system that started, instead of, there's a little centrifuge in there to separate them. For whatever reason, it started backing up and spitting into the helmet itself. So, but the core of Adam's question was, how did Luca react? And when you're on a spacewalk, they watch your heartbeat all the time. His heartbeat never got above 95, I think. And he was just like working the problem, which is a funny thing to hear in the movie because that is just mantra for us, work the problem. And he's like, well, okay, so what do I have so far? What are my problems? What can I do? How can I work my way back? What do I know? What don't I know? And just keep working the problem until either you win or you're done, and there's just no other choices. Nobody else to ask for help.
Yeah, speaking of asking for help, you, as you were originally publishing the Martian online, you were getting some help from your readers about some of the chemistry, some of the math, things like that. Botany. Now that the film has come out and tens of thousands or millions of people have read the book, has anyone come up with something that you hadn't thought of? Big holes in your plot besides the wind on Mars?
There were a couple. The biggest holes were discovered back when it was self-published, because that's when I made my biggest mistakes that got caught right away. One of them was originally when the sequence where he's reducing hydrazine and stuff, that was very simplified in the film. In the book, he goes through this whole thing, and he accidentally ends up putting a very high concentration of elemental hydrogen gas in the hab, and he has to leave the hab, and he's like, the hab is a bomb. What do I do? And then ultimately he reduces the oxygen. He pulls all the oxygen out with the atmospheric control system, so that now he's like, okay, it's all right if there's hydrogen in there as long as there's no oxygen for it to burn with. And then he carefully kind of burns it off bit by bit. Anyway, in the original version that I wrote, I had all the hydrogen float up toward the top of the hab. That doesn't happen. If you fill a balloon with hydrogen, it'll float. But if you release hydrogen into the air, it'll diffuse evenly throughout the air. So I got emails from chemists and 10th graders telling me, no, that's not how gas diffusion works.
Oh, otherwise
the same people
oxygen
that
and
write to me.
nitrogen would go into layers in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'd just be sitting here in whatever the densest. I guess we'd all just be pure nitrogen right now. The oxygen would be up a little higher, and it doesn't work that way. Oh, I got it.
Yeah, Andy, how did you sell the book after you self-published? How did that process happen?
Everything went backwards from the way normal publishing works for me. I posted things to my website, and then a chapter at a time. It took me about 3 years to write the book. And then when I was done, I thought I was done. It was just a serial that I was posting for fun. And when I was done, I'm like, okay, I'm done. And then I got emails from people saying like, oh, hey, I love this story, but I hate your website. And it's reasonable because my website is crap. I mean, it's just pure ghetto. And so...
nerd ghetto.
Nerd ghetto. Just like white background, blue hyperlinks, left justified, just nothing. Like zero effort. The old days. And we were grateful. And we didn't have CSS. But... so they said, can you make an e-reader version? And so I made an e-reader version. I posted that, and I'm like, all right, there you go. And then I got email from other people saying like, hey, I love the story, hate your site. I don't know how to download a thing from the internet and put it onto my e-reader. Can you just post it to Amazon? So I self-published to Amazon. And so the way you do that is you just anybody can do it, any idiot can do it, and you just you post your stuff on Amazon, and then it waits like 48 hours to make sure you're not posting a bunch of goat porn or something, and don't judge, and then. And then they put it up there. Now you're not allowed to give it away for free. Amazon makes their money off of the ebook sales. They don't. They actually lose money on every Kindle they sell. They just know that they're going to make it back on your book purchases. So you're not allowed to give away content. So I had to set the price at a minimum of 99 cents. And so I said, like, all right, you can read it for free on my website. You can download it for free from my website, or you can pay Amazon $1 to put it on your Kindle for you. And more people paid the $1 than downloaded it or viewed it for free. Just it shows the reach that Amazon has into the readership market and the fact that people are willing to pay $1 to avoid technical hassles. And then it started selling really well, and it got a lot of really good reviews, and it worked its way up into the top sellers list, and it started showing up in the Amazon, like, you might also like kind of lists and stuff like that. And then I got approached by a literary agent who said, like, hey, I bet you I can sell your book. Yeah, I bet you I can get you a print deal. I'm like, okay. And then within a couple of weeks, he had me on the phone to Random House, and they worked out. And Random House had approached him. And then around the same time, Fox came and approached us for the movie rights. So
Yeah,
it's
I
like everything was backwards. We never pitched it, ever.
I think I saw somebody saying that Drew Goddard had seen it when it was still an ebook.
Yeah. He had seen it when it was an ebook. Originally, Drew was set to write and direct. But then he left. After writing it, he left the project to go work on the next Spider-Man movie. And then, so he and we already had Matt Damon, right? So it's like we went from having a director and no star to having a star and no director. And then Ridley Scott came and said, like, I'll direct it. And the studio's like, okay, this is greenlit.
Mark.
Oh, thank you. Andy, this is just a little technical challenge question here. I read the book a long time ago when it first came out, so I can't remember if you dealt with this in the book, but each time I've seen the movie, it raises a little flag. What are the chances that a power cable on a future Mars lander would plug into the old Pathfinder?
Well, in the movie, they just kind of like, done. In the book, he has to do a bunch of work to regulate the voltage and change the amp and everything. I mean, but he has like, they have repair equipment aboard, so he has like an electronics kit and, you know. Yeah, so that was covered in the book. But if you're looking for things that are wrong in the book, number one, the biggest one, of course, is the sandstorm. That's what we've covered that. Mars's atmospheric pressure is 1/200th of Earth's at sea level, and a 150 kilometer an hour sandstorm, which happens on Mars, would feel like a gentle breeze. It would have a tough time knocking over a piece of paper.
Did you ever look into what the sound would be? How well air that thin conducts sound?
It would be nearly silent. I mean, there's a little bit, and you would actually hear more through your feet. But yeah, it would be silent pretty much. But so that's the biggest one. The second biggest one is more of a hand wave than an inaccuracy, because I just gave them technology that doesn't remotely exist, which is dealing with radiation, which I'm sure the commander here can speak to. But basically, outside of Earth's magnetosphere, there is there is a lot of radiation, GCRs, which are just basically charged particles coming from all directions, not just from the sun, but from other stars in the galaxy, spitting them out at us. And if you spent as long as Mark spent on Mars without adequate radiation shielding, you'd have so much cancer, your cancer would have cancer. And so, but in the book, I just had a brief, like a 1-paragraph thing where he says, like, everything's shielded. Like there's radiation shield. So they have access in this setting to thin, light, flexible, perfect radiation shielding. But in reality, to block like GCRs, you'd need like a couple of centimeters of lead or 10 centimeters of water or a full meter of rock. Like those are your options. There is no thin, flexible.
It's a carbon nanotube beta cloth.
Yeah, sure. What he said.
Yes.
For all of us losers that actually haven't read the book,
You're dead to me.
I'm gonna go out and get it. It's a great book. Were there any disasters in the book that didn't make it in the movie that you particularly liked or were fun?
I really liked the rover rolling.
That was,
that was. Yeah, when the rover rolls over, he's when he's doing his descent into Schiaparelli crater, he hits a patch of extremely powdery talc-like dust that basically a whole portion of the rover sinks into it, and then it flips, and then it rolls, and there's all sorts of like crap happens and damages things, and yeah, that was a cool sequence. And what's really cool is that now we know like about the recurring slope lineae on Mars, which are these saltwater flows that happen. If I'd known that when I wrote the book, I would have had that be the cause. Like he would have like fallen into basically an aquifer, and that would have been great.
There's an entire sandstorm in the book that inhibits his solar panels from being able to collect enough power to keep him going, but he doesn't know that it's happening and goes through pages and pages of traveling 80 kilometers to set out monitors to see which way the windstorm is actually moving so he can go the opposite way.
Yeah, so he can go around it, yes, navigate around it, yeah. That's another one.
About 3 times as much crap happens to Mark in the book as happens in the movie.
Yeah, so if you liked seeing him get tortured by Mars and then working out all sorts of weird ways around it, read the book.
But on the good side, you get a lot more insight into what's going on inside his head in the book. And that's the really wonderful part, is you get to see the reasoning by which he goes through and solves those problems. Whereas they tried to do it well in the movie of, hey, I know how to solve that. But it's kind of like a constant sequence of eureka moments, whereas in the book it's more methodical into his mental process, which I thought was really a good part of the story.
And speaking of the mental process, you brought up the one thing I realized I missed from the book, which is his mental process does get a little deteriorated over the course of the book, and he's trying to figure out how to take the rover, and he's working out equations that involve watt-hours per sol.
Yes.
And he thinks it's just too
yeah.
long to keep saying watt-hours per sol, so I'm going to shorten that and call them pirate ninjas.
Pirate ninjas.
And pirate ninjas become this major theme towards the later part
pirate
of the book.
ninjas. And if you do the dimensional analysis, a pirate ninja is just a unit of power. And it works out to be about like 40.6 watts is one pirate ninja. It's a kilowatt hour per sol is what it is. And what's funny...
I was sad it wasn't in the movie. I wanted
yeah,
pirate
that's too bad.
ninjas.
But when I was at JPL, I've been to JPL several times now, and one of my trips to JPL, they said, well, one thing they do a lot of is they really care about what they call it's watt hours per sol for them. That matters a lot for like Opportunity rover. It's like how much energy can it store in one sol with its solar panels, and so that's watt hours per sol. It's a budget that they have to work with, and so they've started calling those millipirate ninjas.
Yes, you are in.
Yeah, I have also seen references to. One thing in the book is. The real geography of Mars is talked about a lot when he's on his big course. Well, actually, a brief aside to my own aside here. The Ares 3 landing site I describe as just sort of like this featureless plain, this desert, like a lot of flat land and stuff like that, because that's what was known about Acidalia planitia at the time that I wrote the book. And then since then, they once the book came out and it got popular, the University of Arizona, who controls the HiRISE instrument on Mars Global Surveyor, or Mars Reconnaissance Rover, I always get mixed up which one's which, but they said like, well, he gave the exact latitude and longitude of Ares 3 of the landing site. Let's look. And they looked, and they took a picture with HiRISE, which has a resolution of about 30 centimeters per pixel. So it's like every pixel in the image is like a square foot on Mars. I mean, it's that high. It's a spy satellite, right? And they're like, this isn't anything like he described.
Whose data were you using?
Yeah. But it was awesome to say, oh, well, there's the real Mars. And so they sent me this high-rise photo of like where it was and said like the center of this photo is the coordinates you specified. So I'm like, oh, well, that's what the Ares 3 landing site looks like.
That is awesome.
But anyway, there's a lot of discussion of the geography of Mars when he's traveling from the Ares 3 site to the Ares 4 site, and he uses these major craters and ridges as landmarks because he doesn't have detailed maps for things that are too far away from his landing site. They never thought he'd need it. And so he's traveling and he's like, all right, all I have to do is get between this crater and that crater. So I can miss by like 100 kilometers and it's okay because I'll see one of them and stuff like that. Anyway, there's an arrangement of craters like about halfway through, and it's really large. And there are about 7 craters that kind of form the perimeter of a triangle. So there's 3 big ones and then 4 little ones that are kind of, along the lines of the big ones. And so he calls that the Watney Triangle. And I have seen like references to the Watney Triangle in the wild now. So I'm
No!
like, yeah, that's cool.
You're changing the topography of Mars. Yes.
Sure.
Given how popular the book has been and the movie has been, do you think it can actually have an impact on real policy around us getting towards Mars?
Do you think it can have an impact on policy?
Possibly, but part of a larger kind of like social or kind of interest in space. So I think a lot of people are saying like, wow, The Martian has really has really deeply invigorated interest in the space program. And I'm like, well, maybe, but also I think increased renewed interest in the space program, which is just happening naturally in our society, has caused The Martian. It has caused a market for stories like The Martian, and before it, like Gravity and Interstellar, these kind of like more realistic-ish space movies where the heroes are kind of astronauts who are more technically close to real-world astronauts than, Buck Rogers, right? And I think that's a virtuous cycle, right? There's more public interest in space travel, so there's more like entertainment related to it, which drives more public interest. And I think The Martian is like a part of that. But I see a lot of articles saying like, Andy Weir has single-handedly rescued NASA. And I'm like, I think they're overstating it a bit.
I have a question
Sean.
up here.
Why again did he need to put the balloon on top of his rover? Because that part I didn't understand.
It's a great question.
That really wasn't made clear in the movie. So in the book, he has these 3 critical components: the water reclaimer, the atmospheric regulator, and the oxygenator. And those are the things that manage the water and the air, the water he drinks and the air he breathes. And he needs to bring them with him in order to survive, because he still needs to spend, like, from the moment he leaves the Ares 3 hab to the moment he launches in the Ares 4 MAV, it's like over 100 sols. So it's like over 3 months' time. So he needs this equipment to survive, but it's too big to fit in the rover. It's physically too large to fit. And so he needed to extend the size of the rover. And it needs to be in an atmosphere. It can't be outside.
Yes, Norm.
A question for Commander Hadfield. Can you talk a little bit about the psychology of being an astronaut and the psychological toll of being on a mission that long, how it was portrayed in the film, how it compared to your own experience and your connection to humanity?
We started with real long duration flight on Mir, as at least NASA did. The Russians were already at it for quite a while, or the Soviets. Skylab did 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days, but we really started the long duration stuff on Mir, where it was 6 months. And we had some significant problems because we didn't have enough for the crew to do. It was just trying to make it even happen at all. And not having a full plate of a sense of activity that was worth something gives you a feeling of self-worth and a feeling of value, and so that's really psychologically important. And on the space station now, we don't have that problem. You are so busy. You're completely oversubscribed all the time. You don't have time nearly to get to all the stuff you want to do or everybody wants you to do. But on the way to Mars, you're going to be back to the Mir problem. And they didn't address it in here at all, but those guys would have gone crazy. I mean, there was just nothing to do on that ship for hundreds and hundreds of days. And there was a lot of hand-waving about the time lag of communications back and forth. I don't know how it happened, but it's going to take 14 minutes and 14 minutes, but suddenly everybody's emailing each other simultaneously. That's not the reality. You're never going to have real-time communication with Earth. And you have nothing to do on the ship. And so I've thought about it. How do you maintain? So you need like a holodeck, where you need a virtual reality that people can live in that allows them to stay mentally engaged, or you need to have that vehicle to be so self-contained that it is a whole suite of experiments and things that's enough to keep people fully mentally occupied. Or we need better engines so it doesn't take 6 months to get there and 6 months to get back. And really, in my estimation, we will never go to Mars with the engines that exist right now because of the things Andy was talking about, the radiation threat. Every single day that goes by, anything that has a threat of happening, of course, you have more chances for it to happen. So with chemical rockets, I'll be really surprised if, unless there's some huge threat here, that we would ever go to Mars. We need whatever that little blue thruster was the back of that spaceship.
Ion engines.
Yeah, the ion engine. I don't know where it was getting its power from, but
They have a reactor.
They have a reactor on board. Oh,
Right,
okay.
which makes the immediate question, why do they have tons and tons of solar cells
Yeah,
sticking
what are
out?
those solar cells doing?
To which I say they're more thermal panels. They only look like solar cells.
Oh, okay.
They gotta
I worry
be
more
they
about
gotta
their
be,
giant gym.
I love that the huge amount dedicated to the gym. I love that. And it's like, do you really need 2 rowing machines? You have 6 people on the whole ship. It's like they could maybe work out a schedule.
Well, plus, there was like 10 feet between each machine,
right.
too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was just thinking.
The book actually addresses a couple of the things you were talking about. First off, the ion engines of Hermes. It gets a constant thrust acceleration, and it has a reactor to power things. So there's that. As for something to do, they have like an ISS like science schedule. Like in the book, it mentions that they just have experiments. It even says like NASA's not going to waste, this opportunity to have like a crew doing a bunch of like, space station like experiments. So they spend the whole time they're on their way there doing experiments completely unrelated to Mars and the way back. And they mentioned it briefly in the movie. They said like, oh, we have to do we have to cover your experiments, but it's only botany, so it's not real science. It makes that little crack, but yeah.
I think we have time for a couple more.
Okay, 2 more questions. Yes.
Just wondering, could you talk a little bit why the shuttle program why they scrapped it, and what are they going to rebuild the shuttles and go with new technology?
So, of course, no vehicle lasts forever, and eventually you retire your 73 Dodge. Eventually you got to retire all vehicles and build new ones because technology comes along. And there wasn't any real hard date set for when we were going to retire the shuttle. But after the Columbia accident in 2003, there was a huge push to never fly again. An enormous body of American public and management and people that pay for it that thought you killed everybody on Challenger and you killed everybody on Columbia, and you do not have permission to ever fly spaceships again. And so we had to first figure out what all the problems were and try and fix them. And then we had to convince ourselves as an organization that we actually knew enough of what we were doing that we thought we could actually safely fly again. And then we had to convince all the people that are actually paying for it that we could be trusted to fly again. And in that process, we said, well, how much longer what are we flying them for? And when is the end of the natural life of the shuttles? And so during that process, post-Columbia, 03 to 04, 05, we said we're going to finish building the space station. And that is the natural end. That's what the space shuttles were really for anyway. And that is going to be the natural end of the space shuttles, at the end of the space station program. We said it's got to happen by 2010. And so we built the whole program after Columbia to finish building space station. We decided in 04 we are going to not fly shuttles after 2010 because then you can start planning. Okay, we don't need parts. You can start winding down the whole parts supply plan and how you wind down facilities and manning and all of that. And we got a little bit late. It was just into 2011, summer of 2011. But the beauty of it was we finished the entire space shuttle program, didn't hurt one more person, got the space station built. It was an enormous, rollicking success from our point of view. And so when someone says you scrapped the shuttle program, it's a complete misrepresentation of what actually happened. There's a huge amount of pride that we prolonged the shuttle program, got it flying again, and finished building the space station. And we have enough other vehicles. There's also there's sort of an impression that right now we're like, I hear the expression, we're hitching a ride with the Russians in their Soyuz. So I started studying Russian in 1993. I studied it for 20 years. I was NASA's director of operations in Russia. I learned to fly. I learned orbital mechanics in Russian and vehicle control theory and studied and became qualified to fly a Soyuz. And then I flew as the left seater in a Soyuz as the pilot. And a reporter says, so what's it like hitching rides with the Russians? And it's just like... Yeah, we're not hitching rides, but also we almost rotated no crews on the shuttle. Almost all the crews were were flying on the Soyuz from the beginning, from Expedition 1. And when Bill Shepard flew on Expedition 1, and when Norm Thagard went up, I mean, they flew on Soyuzes. And it's always your lifeboat up there. So no matter what you arrived on, you have to be able to fly the Soyuz anyway to be able to come home, and none of that's going to change. So there's some misrepresentation and understanding of what vehicles were qualified in and why. But what the States is doing right now is SpaceX is building a manned vehicle and Boeing is building a manned vehicle. And both of them, they say 2017. It'll probably run late. Vehicles always run late. But within the next 3 years, hopefully, there will be 2 manned vehicles that can go to the station and back launching from Florida, which is what it should have. They should have planned it better so that we were working 2 programs simultaneously, so we could go straight from the shuttle to Dragon or to what do they call it? No, what is Boeing call their vehicle? Not the CST-100. They came up with a cool name like Dreamliner or something. But
where's John Goodson when we need him?
Anyway, and then meanwhile, NASA is working on Orion, which is a vehicle that can go further than Earth orbit. So all that's going on right now. And crews are training for those vehicles. The first commercial crew, the first crew to fly either the Boeing or the SpaceX vehicle is already chosen and training for it right now. So it's sort of like what happened after Apollo, where Apollo ended and shuttle was still 7 years away. And there's this big, poorly managed lull in the middle just because of how funding cycles work. It's not the way you should do it, but it's just the way it works.
One more question. Is there any? Yes, sorry, go ahead. If we could go to Mars now, would you and why?
Me? No. I write about brave people. I'm not one of them. And so I don't, not only would I not go to Mars, I don't want to leave Earth. I don't want to go to low Earth orbit. I don't want to be in space. I don't want to do a zero-G flight. I've seen you do it on TV.
I threw up all over the place. They cut
did you
that
really?
out. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. In your Apollo suit?
No, in a bag.
Oh, well, that's
Apollo
nice.
suit.
That's
Yeah.
good. In the Apollo suit, that's good. But yeah, I would not want to do any of those things. I'm actually like a very uncomfortable flyer. Just like commercial air travel, like
that's hilarious.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting much better now. It used to be like completely out of the question, but then when NASA invited me out to Houston, I'm like, I have to do this. So I started. They invited me, and it was like 6 months in advance, and I'm like, I started therapy and long-term meds.
You've seen The Reluctant Astronaut, where Don Knotts takes the bus down to NASA, right?
I remember that. Yeah, I remember Don Knotts as an astronaut. I guess it's called The Reluctant. But anyway, so firm no from me.
I no to Mars. I have spent enough time around this man to know that I do not have what it takes. I would be a terrible astronaut. I'm way too hot-headed. I would really love and relish the opportunity to go to near space, however. And if someone offers me the opportunity, I'm totally going to take that. But no to Mars.
My question will be, what in? But it's not a specious question, because that's the real point of what astronauts do and the teams that make it possible is how are we pushing back the edge of what we are technologically capable of. And every single flight of the shuttle, the vehicle got better. Every flight of the Soyuz, it gets better. I mean, I help modify procedures for how we fly the Soyuz just as a foreign crew member in it. And that's, to me, that's the real beauty of it is you're challenged to do something that is really complex and hard, and you're part of the process that makes this possible. I worked in mission control for 25 flights, and oh, by the way, in the movie, they sort of give the impression that the purpose of mission control is to cross your fingers for the first 20 seconds of launch and then cheer wildly.
Yeah,
and that is not what happens in mission control.
That was the worst mission controllers ever. Like the ship, like seriously, they were 38 seconds into the ascent of that probe when they all started cheering.
Yeah, that's not how it works. But anyway. But on STS-99, which was it was a radar laboratory in the back of the shuttle, and we were going to map the entire world in a week and a half. I could just imagine what what people 200 years ago would have thought of that. And the way we did it was at a huge radar in the payload bay, but then so we could get some triangulation, so we could get altitude. We had this like 200-foot long crane that stuck way out to the side of the shuttle with the little radar way out there, so you could get some stereoscopy and get some three-dimensional resolution on Earth. But the trouble is, when you stick something way out to the side of the shuttle, because of the gravity of the Earth, the shuttle wants to go like that. So you need a way to hold it out there. And so someone said, really cool idea, why don't we just put a little tiny tube and just leak a tiny little bit of gas, sort of like Mark Watney's glove, way out there, and it'll just provide just like the weight of a penny, just enough thrust. But when we got up there, the systems didn't work right, and we couldn't generate that. And so now we had to real-time reinvent that entire profile and constantly changing our priorities and try and figure out how to do it with and they went to Draper Labs and changed the controls of the vehicle and everything we could think of to squeeze every last ounce of thrust out of that vehicle to try and map the whole world while we were up there. And we got something like 96% of the objectives done. And
you left out North Dakota.
Yeah, and that was, to me, that was just it was a guy named Leroy Kane who was the lead flight director on his first flight as the lead flight, he made that whole thing happen. He was the guy who was the lead flight director during ascent on Columbia as well, who actually said, lock the doors. But to me, that process of challenging ourselves to do something, have it go wrong, come up with this super clever, drawing every bit of expertise in the whole team, and then learning from it and having a better vehicle, that would be why to go to Mars. And that would be the part that fascinates me. And so what I think there's sort of a misimpression that we go for rides and things so we can get there. And it's the opposite. It's the enablement of so that Adam could go to low Earth orbit and spend some time up there, where you can get a vehicle that's reliable and simple enough that not everybody has to, spend all those years training. That, to me, that would be the real thrill of it, is making that possible. So my answer is yes, just because of the huge delightful life challenge that would go along with it.
That is an awesome place to finish. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andy, thank you. Thank you, 3210, 20th Century Fox. Thanks, you guys, for coming out.